context of white supremacy, justice, and Gus T. Renegade, here to provide constructive information on the system of racism, white supremacy. Thank everybody for tuning in to the broadcast. Hopefully you'll find it constructive. If you don't think the program is constructive, please, especially if you're non-white, find something constructive to do with your time. We do not want non-white people wasting their time and energy if it could be better spent. Today's program, very pleased. And again, I have to give thanks to Professor Dorothy Roberts. She was on the program just a couple weeks ago, and I spoke with her after the program to get more information on how racism, white supremacy impacts the health of non-white people. And I had asked the admitted white supremacist known as Tim Wise, I asked him for this information on the show in June. He said, sure, I'll help out, I'll get you the information. Still haven't got it. I asked Professor Dorothy Roberts. She got back to me immediately, within 2 days of her being on the program. Helpful information. She got me various names of individuals who are doing research on how racism, white supremacy impacts the health of non-white people. I was able to contact some of those folks, looking to get one person who does a lot of research on this to come on the program in October, and I was fortunate enough to get today's guest. As soon as I contacted her, she got back to me immediately, said she'd be happy to come on the show, just tell her when. She's here today. Our guest today, she authored the book Dying While Black. This book is packed with just incredible information about how non-white people, black people in particular, are victimized in the system of white supremacy, the devastating ramifications that it has on the quality of life and health of black people. Our guest today, Dayton University's Professor Vernellia R. Randall. Professor Randall, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. It is a privilege to have you on the program. Could you share, could you share with our listeners anything you think would be helpful so that they get a better idea of who you are and why you do this work?
Well, I'm African American, and I started this work over 40 years ago, first as a nurse. And I was an emergency room nurse in Oregon, and then I'm a nurse practitioner, and I actually was in one of the first federally funded community-based health centers for a low-income community in Seattle in the early 70s, and I did itinerant public health nursing in Alaska, working mostly with Inuits, which is the proper name for Eskimos. Eskimos is sort of a derogative name, and the preferred name is Inuits, and Aleuts, which is a tribe of Native Americans up in Alaska. I did maternal child. I was the maternal child nurse coordinator for the state of Alaska for 5 years, and then I went back to law school. Practiced 3 years in a large law firm. In fact, was the only African American in a large law firm in Oregon during the late 80s. And then I've been teaching law now for the last 20 years here at the University of Dayton. My specialty area, as you can expect, is healthcare law, and which is all my research. I've been teaching healthcare law for 20 years. I also teach race and racism in American law, and I teach at various other courses. So, and all my writings have been on health system changes in the African American community. I focus on the African American community not because I'm building a hierarchy of pain. Many other groups, including Appalachian whites, have serious health issues that are at the root is the white supremacy problem as the root of their cause. But it seems to me, I've always felt that you really couldn't understand that if you didn't look at history. And since everybody's history is somewhat different, grouping everybody together allows you to blot out the history that of how white supremacy has affected them differently in ways, how the route of white supremacy in terms of affecting their health, as opposed to, say, Native Americans, Appalachian whites, Asian Americans, Latinos. So that's my background.
Outstanding. I just wanted to ask really quick, I'm curious because you do cite Professor Roberts in your work, and I think she cites you as well. And like I said, she's the reason that I came to be aware of your work. Do you know Professor Roberts?
I know her personally, yes. I mean, it's a small community of people who...
Hold on one second. There's a lot of background disruption. There are two callers on the line, and they are both showing up as 111, so I can't distinguish between which caller is Miss Randall and who is the other person that called in. The other person that's on the line, if you could mute your phone.
Wipe your face. You got to brush your hair.
Okay. The other person is causing a lot of disruption. I'm going to have to play with the lines to figure out which person is her and which person is you because, as I said, the numbers are not showing up on the switchboard, so I can't distinguish between which person is Miss Randall and which person is the other person, and they're causing a lot of background disruption. My apologies, Miss Randall.
That's fine.
Yeah, no problem. But you were saying that you do know.
Well, as you can imagine, the community of African American law professors is a relatively small community, and then those who are working in healthcare disparities is relatively small. And so, yes, I know Professor Roberts. I know her very well and have been on panels with her, and her work is outstanding.
I agree wholeheartedly. She was on the program on August 9th, and we talked about killing the black body. I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and it was twice as enjoyable to have her on the program, sharing very constructive information. And I think your book is a nice follow-up to her work and her presentation on this program. You already said you are an African-American female, non-white person. This program, the C.O.W.S, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and the definition that I use for racism, white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
I think to a large extent, I think it's accurate. I definitely think that the system exists, but I say that the system of white supremacy has expanded to be a system of using capitalism as a means of oppression, and that others who are not white buy into the system of white supremacy, not so much because of them being white, but wanting the benefits that comes from being in the system. And that you don't I would argue that the system in that people who maintain the system includes non-whites as well.
I completely agree that non-white people, including myself, all non-white people play some role in maintaining the system of white supremacy. But I think, at least my view, it is most accurate, regardless of whether it's President Obama, myself, Professor Roberts, or any other non-white person, that it would be most accurate to say that that non-white person is a victim of white supremacy. They may get certain benefits or products from the system, but more than anything, they are being mistreated because they are not white in the system of racism, white supremacy.
I tend to think that if you're in a system that you are a victim of the system, but I also tend to think that the level of victimization is of choice. That there is some level of victimization that you have to know. I believe that people begin to have to say, wait a minute, people are making a choice to collaborate. Not let me say the level of victimization. That's not right. It's the level of collaboration with the system is one of choice because of the benefits they receive. And I'm not sure that I can allow people, say for instance like Clarence Thomas, to get off the hook because he's been victimized by the system. He still has a level of choice of how he responds to that victimization. And when he responds by being a perpetrator of white supremacy, he has to, in my mind, we have to take ownership of the fact that he's a collaborator with the enemy.
I think that is a very valid point, and I think other non-white people have raised that exact same perspective on this program. I want to pull in my co-host, Justice. She is 10. She is a non-white female, and she has a great understanding of the system of racism, white supremacy, and she is here because she wants to learn more about what she can do to make choices to work against that system and help replace white supremacy with justice. So I want to bring her in so she can ask questions, and hopefully we can all. Justice, go right ahead.
Okay. I have something to ask. Can everyone on the call try to speak at a vocabulary level I can understand? I'm 10 years old. Thank you.
I'll do my best.
I will do my best, too. But you have to ask me, speak up and ask me when I've said something you don't understand so that I can be sure and explain myself more specifically.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there anything else?
Yes. I have a. How do white people practice racism, white supremacy?
Well, in this sense, I think that that many, if not most, white people collaborate with the system on an unconscious and unintentional level. That is, I don't think most white people go out this morning saying, how can I maintain this system where and discriminate against black people? I think what they do instead is have these biases and prejudice and things that are built into this system in their mind, and that they don't make a conscious decision to figure out why they make the decisions they make, and then they are willing to accept as a benefit all of the benefits of the system without working to overthrow the system, working to weaken the system. And so most individual whites, because when we talk about systems, in my mind, when you talk about most individual whites, like most individual blacks, are victimized without actually doing, blacks are victimized without actually having to do anything, and whites gets benefits without actually having to do anything, and it's only people who are in positions of power to make choices that I think are active perpetrators, active people who are actively maintaining the system as opposed to passively maintaining the system.
Okay. And how do you work to produce justice?
Are you talking about me as an individual, or are you in the global level? Everyone.
I'm talking about you. How do you work to produce justice?
Well, you know what? I have to tell you, it started with my, like you, it started with my family. And I learned it from my great-grandfather who was born, my great-grandfather who was a slave, and my father, my grandfather who made choices to help his individual family overcome white supremacy, and not overcome, but to understand what white supremacy means, and to make sure that all his children in the 1920s got educated and were active. And then my father, who educated me to be an activist, and that started by me being an activist on a small level with my own brothers and sisters and friends and stuff, and within my own community, doing what, agitating for them for what was right. And then throughout my life, even though I've been, my entire life, I have been in predominantly white institutions, I have actively looked for how I can be vocal and visible both within my personal life and in my professional life as a law professor. So I choose to teach race and racism in American law, and I choose to put up a website on race and racism in the law. I choose to send emails out to my entire faculty and the student body, even though they constantly hate it and are constantly agitating to try to figure out a way they can stop me from sending them emails. I keep doing it anyway. I choose to say that one time my dean said to me on an issue that I wasn't a team player. And I said to her that if she meant that being a team player was that I would have to choose this job over what was best for the black community, then yes, I wasn't a team player and I never would be. And so I have tried in my life to say that no job is as important as dismantling white supremacy. And while I've got to keep a job in order to feed my family, I don't have to collaborate with it 100%. And if that's the kind of job I have, then I need to move on and figure out something else to do. Does that answer your question? You want more specifics?
Yes, please.
Well, let's see. I wrote a book called Dying While Black. I wrote an article on managed care. I actually went to the World Conference Against Racism in 2001 and was the active leader of the Health Caucus in Durban in 2001. In fact, not only was I the leader, one of the things I do is I notice a void and I step in. I figure it's no use complaining about what isn't being done. If you think it needs to be done, do it. And don't come to me telling me what I need to do. If you think it needs to be done, do it. Because I'm going to do what I think needs to be done. And you can look at what I'm doing and say, okay, this is what she thinks needs to be done. And I often get people who want to say, because I'm an activist and I do things, they want to tell me what I need to do, and I'm not for that. I'm for, no, don't tell me what I need to do. You do it. If you've spotted an area that needs to be covered. So when I went to the World Conference Against Racism and went to the PrepComs and noticed that PrepComs are the meetings that they have before the actual conference. And that's where all the decisions are made. The world conferences, the decisions have already been made for the most part. And so when I went to one of the first PrepCom in Santiago, Chile, I noticed that there was no conference, no committee on health of people of color. And so I just stepped forward, volunteered, and started it. Me and two other people basically did it for a year and a half. And we were able to accomplish a lot in terms of language in the document. So I think the other thing that I to try to live by is the idea that you don't need a lot of people to make change. In fact, sometimes a lot of people get in the way. Because the most radical decisions gets compromised when you have a lot of people, because you have to persuade people, and that moves you to the middle. If you want to do something very radical, sometimes a few people is the best. Now, if you need the community to go along with you, of course, you have to work with the community, the larger community in larger numbers. But a lot of things can be done with 2 or 3 people in a lot of settings. And we often spend a lot of time trying to convince others of the rightness of what we need to do when they're not planning to do anything anyway. And you could go on and get it done. But part of the reason people don't do that sometimes, they don't want to deal with the backlash of, well, why didn't you ask this, or why didn't you do this? And I prefer action and to say, okay, I'll deal. If people are upset over what I've done, I'll deal with it. But I'm not going to let passivity of other people get in the way. So I went to the world. I do a lot of work on international human rights, and particularly trying to hold the United States responsible for the treaties that it has signed related to international human rights.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, too.
Justice, do you have any more questions right now?
Not right now.
Okie dokie. I'll ask a few and I'll come back. Hopefully you'll think of some excellent questions. Professor Randall, your book, Dying While Black, on page 27, you said it is dangerous to be black. Can you explain why you made that statement and why you think that statement is true?
There's a film called Unnatural Causes. PBS put it out, and they're rerunning it in October. Okay. And so if you get the chance to look at it, it's about health disparities in the United States. But one of the things that they said is that being black in America is like a plane load, a jumbo jet load of black people with nothing but black people in it, falling out the sky. Everyone in the plane is killed every day of every year.
What? Wow.
So that's what I mean. That the health disparities is not just some, we have a little bit more diabetes, we have more HIV. In fact, I think the disease model of dealing is dilutes the fact that black people are dying from everything more than white people, and it's not related to class. So it's not about being poor, which is the first place that a lot of people like to go. Well, yeah, there's more blacks are poor than, and so that's why it is. No, that's not why it is. In fact, the studies show that one study showed that poor blacks in this county outlived poor whites outlived poor blacks in this particular county by 3 years. A lot of time, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Middle-class whites outlived middle-class blacks by 10 years.
Wow.
Now, it's true that middle-class blacks live longer than middle-class whites. That's true. Poor whites, I always have to say this over. Middle-class blacks live longer than poor blacks. But middle-class whites live longer than middle-class blacks, and significantly longer. 10 years is a lot of difference compared to 3 years between poor whites and poor blacks. So when I say being black in this society is dangerous, anything that kills you is dangerous. And when you look at, when you have doctors saying, neonatologists saying, we're looking at infant mortality and trying to figure out why black babies are dying more than white babies. And we thought that it was going to be because of poverty. But when we controlled for class and weight and exercise and how people eat, wow, white people are still having less infant mortality than black people, even when the black people eat like white people, exercise like white people, have the same educational income level as white people. So when you look at that, you have to say there's something about being black in America that is dangerous.
Professor Vernellia Randall, author of Dying While Black. In your book, you start off and you use this as a consistent reference point. You talk about the slave health deficit. Can you explain that for our listeners so that they understand what that means and how that impacts why it is dangerous to be a black person in the system of white supremacy and in America specifically?
Okay, first of all, I have to recognize that the term slave health deficit is not mine. It is by Dr. Michael Bird and Dr. Linda Clayton, two black physicians who you must get on your program.
Will do.
They have written the definitive books on the medical history of African Americans and the problem of race. And they wrote 2 volumes, and each volume is several hundred pages long. And they trace that history back back before slavery, through Africa. They from the beginnings to 1900, and from 1900 to when they put their book out, the last book out in 2002. Okay, so slave health deficit is the idea that enslaved people didn't arrive to America healthy. And I think that's the biggest thing that I like to get out of people's minds. People weren't walking off the boat singing Kumbaya, being healthy. They were sick. How could they not be? They had been marched thousands of miles across a continent, many of them. They had been held in dungeons that were built to hold gold, not people. Then they were put on ships and packed tighter than cattle. And the only way they got off those ships before arriving to the Caribbean was to die or to get so sick that they thought they were going to die. Because one of the things that happened over the Inner Passage is that insurance companies like Aetna insured, just like they insure property today, enslaved people were property, and they insured them then. But they would only pay if they drowned, not if they died of illness. And so many of the ship owners would throw sick people off the ship so that they could say they drowned. But they ended up, they would go to the Caribbean. They didn't come directly to the United States. They most often went to the Caribbean, where they were prepared for auction, just like you would prepare any animal. You feed it, you clothe it, and in this case, the United States, different from South American slavery, didn't like their slaves to speak their native language and to have any hint of their native culture. And so there was a period in which that was whipped out of them. So they weren't just brought from Africa to the United States. They were brought from Africa to the Caribbean, and when they got off the ship, because of that whole transatlantic slave trade process, most of them were sick. And so we started our being here in America sick. Unlike any other group, except maybe the Irish. And it would be interesting to compare them, because the Irish left the country, the poorest of the Irish left, and they left as well being sick. And they weren't considered white either when they got here. That's a whole other discussion to have, is how did the Irish become white? Because
we had Noel Ignatieff on the show.
Yes. So anyway, so they're sick. We're sick when we get here. Slavery doesn't do anything to make it as well. In fact, it makes us sicker in many cases. And so in 1865, 66, when slavery ended, you have, coming out of slavery, a vast majority, it's like almost 100% of the people who were enslaved were people in need of health and health care, with no health or health care available, okay? And so Congress passed a bill, the Freedmen's Bureau bill, saying we're going to build health facilities and we're going to build schools, because also people had been denied education. That attempt at reparations lasted 1 year. And and so now you've got sick people with no resources, no money, no schools, no health care facilities, and you go into the next generation. And now you've got Jim Crow and all that that means, and the stress, and I'd like to get back to you if you ask me. I'd like to get back to this whole idea of how stress is the root cause of a lot of the problems. Racial stress, white supremacy, is the root cause of the disparity in health among classes. So you have all of these people who are sick, and so generation after generation. And one of the things that any good maternal nurse will tell you or doctor will tell you is that the health of the mother affects the child. That no one is going to argue with that. If you have a mother who's unhealthy, that child is going to be born with, at a minimum, unhealthy biological impact upon themselves, okay, that is going to impact them through their lifespan, okay? So if the health of the mother affects the child, then my health was affected by my mother's health, whose health was affected by her mother's health, whose health was affected by her mother's health, who was a slave. And since nothing has been done over these generations to remove that slave health deficit, we are still the black health deficit that we see is still in part due to that original slave health deficit.
Again, Professor Vernellia R. Randall, and I will certainly be working to get Dr. W. Michael Bird and Dr. Linda Clayton to come on the program to talk about their work. Listeners, you can look for that coming down the pike in the future. I wanted to say, since you have elaborated in great detail about and why it is dangerous to be a black person in America under the system of white supremacy, do you think it's accurate, and do you think that the evidence would suggest that the system of racism, white supremacy, is designed to keep non-white people and black people especially in poor health?
Absolutely.
Can you explain that for us, please?
Well, first of all, we know the system is designed. Let me get my thoughts together. Okay. Let's take basic infant health. Let's say all things being equal. Okay. First of all, we know what impacts the health of infants if you take race out, right? If you just look among white people, okay, if you compare whites, we know that educational level impacts health. What do we have? We have an educational system designed to keep blacks undereducated. We know that we have an educational system designed. We have a legal system designed to keep blacks out of jobs. We know that the income you make. We have a legal system. How do I say that? First of all, we have a legal system that puts a disproportionate number of black people in jail with felonies for nonviolent crimes, and then forbid them to have jobs such as, hold your breath, being a barber. And what's one of the main things that you can do in a black community? You can be a barber. But now if you've gone to jail, that's out of your reach. And there's all of these, a person you should have on to talk about prison is the prison system and all of the things that happen to them is Professor Scott Washington. This is not my area of expertise, but I talk about it in relationship to what happens to health. So you have a large portion of our population who can't get a large portion of jobs because the legal system says that the very fact that you've been to prison is enough to make you ineligible for the job. Okay, so then we need people so money, so education, money. Then you need people to eat right, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You need fresh vegetables. we know that that makes a difference. In all of my speaking, the consistent problem that I see black communities talking about is access to food. That you can drive through a black community and you can get fast food like nobody's business. In my own community, drive a mile down the main street, it's called Salem, and you will have Wendy's, Burger King's, all of them within that mile. But try to find a grocery store with good fresh food, and you got to drive 5 miles. So you say, now, why is that? Because when you go to the white communities, middle class and poor alike, they're not having the same food disparities. So you've got the number one factor for predicting where a toxic dump will go is the race of the community. This was done by the Environmental Protection Agency. So this is a government study that says, whoa, when we look at where toxic dumps go, race is more predictive than class. And class only comes after race. So how can this system, and then you have a system then you have an utter refusal to articulate these facts clearly and accurately to the masses of whites who are ignorant. And so by keeping most white ignorant of what's going on, are parsing the information out little by little. So we'll do one study here and it'll show up, but it pops up like an individual study and, oh, look what we've discovered. But we never have this concerted effort to say, okay, we're going to really educate people about what's going on. We're going to give them all the facts at one time, and we're going to repeat it over and over again so that they can't miss it. To me, that doesn't happen by chance. There's something about the white supremacy system that makes it acceptable for all this to occur, and then the people who could have the authority to make a change don't understand it as a system and try to analyze it as individual people making individual decisions.
Context of white supremacy with Professor Vernellia R. Randall. I wanted to ask because non-white people, black people, it being dangerous to be a black person in the system of white supremacy, you just illustrated a litany of reasons that evidence why that is the case. I wanted you to share with our listeners, not so much now, but early part of the 20th century, science and medicine, white people, suspected racist white supremacists, some of them overtly racist white supremacists, scientists and doctors, people involved in healthcare and medicine in the early 20th century did a lot of work that was explicitly racist, and that has had a huge impact on the slave health deficit that you mentioned and the atrocious health that black people have to this day. Can you share with our listeners just some of the information about the work of individuals, Samuel Cartwright, Dr. Benjamin Rush, Margaret Sanger, and the eugenics work that went on in the early 20th century, and the impact that that has continued to have on why black people are in such poor health in this area of the world?
Well, the interesting thing that this is really the historical basis for racialized health care. I can't even begin to go into detail like the way that Dr. Bird and Dr. Clayton does, and all of my work is based on their work, but I will relay some of the things. I mean, to start off with, you have to understand that the medical frame, that medicine in the 18th century was not a profession as much as a trade. And you have to put that, and anybody could be a doctor in the 1700s and really through the middle 1800s. It wasn't until the late 1800s and the mid 20th century, 1920 and 1930, that medicine actually made the transition from a trade to a profession. So when you look at medicine, you have to think about it like that. The basis of medicine started off as a trade. And like all of the institutions today, the institution of medicine, people use the institution of medicine to support the white supremacist idea. And they did that by coming up with theories of differences between blacks and whites that explained why whites were superior. So the medicine, the role of medicine, one of the roles, I don't want to say the only role, but one of the roles of medicine was to establish a scientific reason for the difference for treating slaves the way they treated them. That is, that they deserve to be treated that way. So physicians defined slaves as biologically different from whites. So they defined black people as biologically different and invented slave diseases to explain slave behavior. So if you were a slave who ran away too much, they thought you had a disease called drapomania, because obviously no slave in their right mind would run away from a good master. If you had pain caused by the heavy burdens and kicks of the masters, you were just sick, because they call it difficult parturition. Slaves, some enslaved people would eat dirt, and it was because of a nutrition deficit and lack of feeding, but that was seen as a disease of the slaves, of enslaved people. And then they did outright. So first of all, that's where we start, and we have to start with. I love to talk about Dr. Rush, because Dr. Rush was he signed the Constitution. He signed the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Rush was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and is known as an abolitionist. Okay, so this has to make us understand that even white people who articulate things that are supposed to be for our benefit may be doing it from a position of white supremacy. And you have to look at their reasoning underneath, not their behavior. Because if you don't look at their reasoning underneath their behavior, then you might end up befriending them in a way that ultimately causes you harm, because they really are white supremacists in their nature. And I think Dr. Benjamin Rush was one of those people. Anyway, he was a psychiatrist. And he said that he thought black people suffered from a mild form of leprosy, which he called nigritude. And nigritude was blackening of the skin, big lips, flat nose, woolly hair, and a smell. Now, when I read that, I thought, excuse me, it sounds like he's just describing a black person. Because we know that our skin is black, so darker, our lips are bigger, so our nose are flatter, and we have woolly hair. And it's true that your biology, based on what you eat and where you're from, and you will give off a different smell than other people. I mean, the people are notorious talking about how the French smell and their smell. So it's not a bad smell, it's just different. And his cure was to become white.
Wow.
But he could never find that cure.
Wow.
So by definition, we're sick. Our blackness makes us sick. And so that's a medical system which we're working in. And then, of course, we have the research that was done. You know, people talk about how blacks don't trust the healthcare system, and I'm like, well, I'm not sure we should trust the healthcare system. I mean, we always talk about Tuskegee, but we don't talk about. Well, for one thing, we don't. Dr. Marion Sims. Dr. Marion Sims is considered the father of gynecological surgery. And he perfected the technique, a surgical technique. And if you put Marion Sims into Google, there are statues all over the United States. And few of those statues mention that he perfected this technique on enslaved women, that he refused to sedate them. Instead he addicted them to drugs. He performed, but it was all post-operative. He refused to sedate them during the surgery. He performed the same surgery multiple times, 16, 20 times, on 3 enslaved women. In fact, they think those 3 women underwent 29 different surgeries. No one talks about that. No one talks about what does that mean for the sort of hidden value of medicine in white supremacy when you can use enslaved people without impunity in the present. You say, well, people will argue, well, you know, that may be okay for his time. Well, I'm not going to argue with his time, but it's not okay today. Mm-hmm. And so if we're going to honor him, we also should point out his behaviors that were unacceptable so that people would know that medical students will know that what medicine did, how it did, and what's unacceptable. Instead, by hiding it, it seems to say we are not going to tarnish his memory with his own behavior. Thomas Jefferson, the common story about Thomas Jefferson and smallpox is how he so was enthralled with the power of smallpox, this new smallpox vaccine, as a way of preventing the spread of smallpox, that he had his whole family vaccine, and that is true. But the rest of the story is that he had almost 200 slaves vaccinated before he had his family. So he didn't actually take a risk with his family. He took a risk with his property. He knew it was going to work with his family because it had worked on his enslaved property. And then you have people like Dr. Jones, who poured gallons of boiling water down the spines of enslaved people to test the remedy for typhoid pneumonia. I mean, the list goes on and on. Then you have the post-slavery experimentation. So you have, what we have is evidence of the experiment on the black body started with slavery and has continued up and through to today. And it's continued under the guise of prison and military. Because when you're in prison, and they do have to get your consent in prison, but they give you benefits for doing it. And so you're an imprisoned person, and you are likely to consent to some of these experiments. And since blacks are disproportionately represented in prisons, that means they're disproportionately represented in these experiments. In military, you actually give up the right of consent. And they're not telling young men. Now, you realize that if you join the military, you are consenting for your body to be used for experiments. In addition to whatever else they want to use your body for.
Wow. Again, Professor Vernellia R. Randall. I want to go to Justice to see if she has questions, but the experiments, there's lots of research, books, and different reports on that. If you want to look at prison experiments specifically, there's a book, Acres of Skin. Professor Randall mentions that in her work, Dying While Black. I actually read that book some time ago. Might actually work to get that author to come on the show, but he writes extensively about how predominantly black males were abused in prison experiments in Pennsylvania during the 1960s. Exactly what Professor Randall just said. They do have to get the consent of these prisoners, but you're in a very tough spot being in jail. You get benefits for some of these experiments that are mentioned in Acres of Skin. The prisoners got money, so, hey, I'm in a tough bind. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. That book details just really horrid examples of how black people thoroughly abused in the prison industrial complex through medical experiments, where white people didn't, really think this was anything bad. They were making money doing this and getting their products tested on people that they didn't seem to have too much regard for. Justice, do you have some questions that you would like to ask?
Yes, I do.
Go right ahead.
When you were talking about culture earlier, what do you mean by culture?
Okay, culture, in my mind, is everything that goes into making you who you are that's not biology, okay? It's not only the foods, it's the values and beliefs of your group, your beliefs about eating, about exercise, about the books and things arts that you generate, that your group generates. To me, it's the totality of everything that is you, that can go to your group, not just you as an individual, so that you can take a look at a group and you can say, when I look at Southern white Appalachians, I see certain things about how they eat, what they believe, what they do, and that is different either in it can be very different from, say, Southern black Appalachians, or it can just be different on some small levels. But that's what I mean by culture. Does that make sense? What do you think culture means?
That does make sense.
And so it goes to it's not just the individual, it's looking at the group. So there's an American culture, and then there's a culture for people who have similarities based on their race. So for me, there's an and I don't have a term for it, and I don't mean to offend Native Americans, but I believe that the best term for black people who have their history out of slavery is indigenous black. I believe that because the blacks who have their history out of slavery, such as myself, our ancestors came from many, many different parts of Africa with many, many different cultural contexts. And we were brought here and we were forced to form a culture that did not exist before getting here. The culture of African descendants don't exist on the continent of Africa. Some parts of it exist, things that we've kept with us from Africa and that we brought in after, that we bring in. But you can't point to a place like Nigerians can point and say, okay, I have a culture that's based on my Nigerian history, or I have a culture that's based on my Brazilian history, or I have a culture that's based on my French history. African American, indigenous blacks' culture is based on bringing together all of different aspects of many different culture and forming a subculture based on the unifying experience of slavery.
Okay. And what are the best things people can do to work against the system of racism, white supremacy? Please answer first what a non-white person can do, then what a white person can do.
Well, I think the non-white person to work against it, I think they both are pretty similar. But I think the non-white person has to first be willing to admit in all circumstances that a system of white supremacy exists. And they have to take that risk and not deny it. And I think part of our problem right now is that non-white people, in order to get along, won't say that a system of white supremacy exists. They may believe it. I think the second thing they can do is they then can find out how, within the context of their own job, where they're located, and their job, their family, and community. Those are the three areas where we all have the ability to impact things. We can impact our family by making sure that our family understand what the system of white supremacy is, like your dad is doing with you. You can impact, and like I did with my children, my boys who are not boys anymore, they're 38 and 32. But you can make sure that your family understand what a system of white supremacy is, and we can begin to develop the skills to challenge white supremacy when we can, to be able to accurately figure out when it is relatively safe to challenge it. And I say relatively because the problem with challenging white supremacy is it's never safe. But there's and sometimes people have to be martyrs in their jobs, martyrs in their community, martyrs in their life. There's Frederick Douglass has a wonderful poem, and I put it up on my website, where he talks about that, there is not going to be change I'll find it, because I'd really like to say it to you all before I leave. But the whole idea that if we think that this system is going to be changed without challenge, then it's never going to happen. And so that means that no one can challenge anything by themselves and expect that by themselves that it will happen, because we all are challenging it with toothpicks or with little picks. But if we all work together over time, it will weaken the system and move. And so I figured, so the thing that I think that non-white people have to do is, one, educate themselves, educate their family, and accept and articulate to whites that this is a issue of white supremacy. And they have to challenge the system in their family, in their job, in their community. And personally, I think the same thing for whites. I think whites have a little bit more difficult because when you see yourself benefiting from the system, you're less likely one to believe that the system exists. And you can't challenge a system that you don't believe exists. And so the hardest thing for whites is allowing themselves to wake up from the matrix and see the system and know that it does exist. But once they do that, then they have, because I feel like that when a white person challenges white supremacy and the system of white supremacy, their challenge is given more authority than a black person or a person of color. That's the whole part of the system of white supremacy. When I challenge the system of white supremacy, my arguments, although exactly the same as a white person's, is discounted because I have an interest, and that people believe because I have an interest I can't be fair and objective and see what's really going on. And so it's imperative that whites speak up at every chance they get, and it may not be any more than when they're in white groups and white people are saying even the mildest disparaging thing about a person of color that is based on a stereotype bias. They challenge it. They don't let it stand. But of course, they can do more than that, a lot more. And I think that essentially, I can't tell you specifically what to do because I'm not in your family, I'm not in your community, and I'm not on your job. But I can tell you that in all three of those areas, there's work to be done, and your job as a white person and as a non-white person is to figure out what that is and then do it. Are you still there?
I'm here. Justice, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. It was so quiet.
No problem.
I'll think of some more questions on the way.
Okay.
I'll come back to you. Professor Randall, I really want to make sure, nail this one, to share this with the listeners, because I think this is I think everything that has been shared thus far is immensely important, but this in particular. You spent a whole chapter in your book talking about the tobacco industry and cigarettes.
Right.
Before we even get to that, I just found this out not too long ago. Did you know some white people reference Newports in particular as gorilla mints?
No, I hadn't heard that before.
I laughed at first, and then I just had to put my head down. Like, man, this is it's really
not
bad.
Surprising.
Yeah. I mean, it was just the time I heard it, it was kind of a lot. But yeah, apparently there are a lot of white people, that is their derogatory term for Newport cigarettes that predominantly black people smoke. They call them gorilla mints. But in your book, you really talk about how the tobacco industry targets black people and the damaging health consequences of that. Can you break that down for our listeners, how the evidence that shows that that the tobacco companies target black people and the ramifications on the health of black people that has?
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to do. My study started largely by watching my dad, who, and I dedicate this chapter to him, who tried everything under the sun to quit and never could, and eventually died of cancer at a relatively young age for our family. He was in his 70s, but my grandfather lived into his 90s, and my great-grandfather, who was an enslaved person, lived into his 90s. So when I say that tobacco caused premature death, I really have felt it. The targeting of the black community has gone over for six decades, over 60 years. And it's not just the billboards that they used to be prevalent, but it was also the way they spent money. They designed packages and targets for it to appeal to the black community. They co-opted. And going back to our earlier discussion, I really feel like one of the things that we have to start bringing to task is black leaders and organizations who, in the name of getting what they can, co-op us. Because a large part of what was done to the black community was done with the assistance of Jet and Ebony and Essence, all of who took a higher percentage of tobacco industry, some of them who then read articles tailored to downplay the impact of tobacco on our community. And so tobacco industry brought, over an 8-year period, there was 1,477 tobacco advertisements just in Jet, Ebony, and Essence. Okay, and that they used a higher percentage, the total amount of advertising revenues for those companies had a higher percentage for minority magazines than it did for other magazines. And they poured millions of dollars into advertising. And then, of course, we all know the sponsorships. The Operation Push, Philip Morris with Operation Push, William R. Reynolds started the K-Bidding Reynolds Memorial Hospital for blacks in a segregated community. The amount of money, the Cool Achievement Awards, the Ebony Fashion Show, they sponsored forums for publishers and black newspapers. And all during this time, people were taking that money, and while these death traps were being pushed on our community. And it's continuing. And the latest round, the most latest and cynical round that has happened to our community is a law was recently passed to regulate, to allow the FDA to regulate cigarettes as a drug, right? And that's a significant achievement. And part of that regulation was to include flavorings. Guess which flavoring they exempt?
I'm going to say menthol.
Menthol.
And why is that significant?
That is significant because 90% of the cigarettes that are smoked in the African American community is menthol, and that without menthol cigarettes, the cigarette companies would have a huge loss. And it's significant because no one really knows the impact of menthols. We know, for instance, that black smokers start smoking later in life than white smokers. White smokers tend to start in their teens. Black smokers tend to start in their early 20s. That black smokers smoke less cigarettes on average than white smokers, but that black smokers have a higher addiction rate and a harder time quitting than white smokers. So I think it's a complicated situation. I think the stress of racism is, I think, one of the talk about the system of white supremacy, why, they did a study of black tobacco use, like drug use, is lower than white tobacco use on average. And for teenagers, teenage girls in particular, and teenage boys as well, it's almost non-existent. It's when they get to be adults. And they ask young blacks why they didn't smoke, and it goes to the strength of the family. And they said, my parents would kill me if they knew I was smoking. And yet, this use of menthol there has to be a reason. If we don't start if we start later than they start and we smoke less than they smoke, why do we have a harder time quitting? I think the racism that part of it may be that dealing with racism on a daily level causes you to be harder to quit an addiction that gives you some comfort in some way, a drug in your body. But I think another reason, which isn't research, is menthol. And I think by exempting menthol from the FDA, we may never be able to find that out. And that just happened in the last year.
Wow. I also wanted to touch on with the cigarettes. You also talk extensively about how the settlement that the tobacco companies made really did not address the black community and a lot of the negative health effects that cigarette smoking has on black people. The settlement that the tobacco companies made really didn't address us, and a lot of the agreements that were made in that settlement are going to make it difficult for black people to try to do anything in the future to address those health concerns. Could you talk about that as well?
Right. The National Tobacco Settlement in its enacting legislation basically left us at the mercy of the tobacco company. And it did so because it gave immunity to the drug companies to the tobacco companies for individual suits based on for the individual suits, and it didn't specifically carve out resources to address the targeting of the African American community. It just grouped us in as just another community without saying there was any exception. And then it gave the money to the states to use almost any way they want to use. Now, so here's the problem. Many of the states have been using it for things unrelated to helping people prevent. So like schools and roads and that sort of thing. A large portion of it. Now, also the amount of money that the states will get every year depends on tobacco sales. So who has an incentive to decrease tobacco sales? If the money that they're using, let's say they're getting $60 million a year from the tobacco company, and they're putting it into their roads, okay? if they actually do something, let's say they put half of it into their roads, 30 million.
Okay.
If they actually do something to decrease smoking, let's say they could cut it in half, that meant that revenue would get cut in half. And now instead of having 30 million to go into the road, they only have 15 million to go in the road. And so the settlement didn't address this at all. None of the organization, and this is this whole issue, the way the system of white supremacy maintains itself and impacts the health is by trying to be colorblind. In fact, I think one of the most dangerous moves we have for our community is this colorblind movement. Because a colorblind movement means that I won't collect data on differences, and I'll treat every community as if they are, I will treat them in analysis as if they're the same, but in fact, because I've set up a system of white supremacy, the whites will maintain their position of authority and power. And I don't have to have data to prove that. You need data to prove that you're being treated differently. I don't need data to know that I am not being treated differently, or that my group is not being treated differently. And so when I argue to get rid of data, I'm arguing to empower white supremacy. And that's what has happened with the tobacco settlement in terms of it refused to, in its negotiation of a settlement, it refused to deal with adult communities. It dealt with children, but not African American children. It refused. It took a colorblind approach, both with children and adults, ignoring that there wasn't a colorblind approach to the marketing of cigarettes, and there hasn't been a colorblind effect.
Professor Vernellia R. Randall, Context of White Supremacy. Justice, do you have some questions that you've thought of?
Yes, I have.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
How do you think you would feel once the system of racism and white supremacy is eliminated?
Oh, my God. That would be, I didn't jump for joy when Obama was elected, and I wasn't dancing in the street. I haven't danced in the street when any black person got elected. But I have to tell you, if the system of white supremacy was eliminated in my lifetime, I would dance in the street and do all. I don't know. I might have a heart attack. I'd be so overjoyed and happy. My worry, and in fact, it brings tears to my eyes just thinking about it, because my worry is that my children's children is going to live in a system of white supremacy, that I'm going to die, and that the legacy that I will have left, not intentionally, but nevertheless left, is that my children will live in a system of white supremacy. And so I would be over. I mean, I can't even think of the joy that I would have, and the release and the pleasure and the happiness. I'd probably run around kissing everybody. So I'm a pretty. I don't do that sort of joyous celebration on these so-called accomplishments, but I would do it then. And I just wish and hope that something could happen, that at a minimum we can put such a major crack in it that in your lifetime you will be able to get rid of it.
Okay, and how can the system of white supremacy be stopped?
I wish if I knew the answer to that, hon, we wouldn't have the system. I mean, I can't give you an answer to that, because I think that better people than me would have stopped it if it was something knowable. To be quite honest, I think something catastrophic has to happen to the United States that makes this, and to the world, that makes the system of white supremacy no longer economically viable. And one of the things that I feel like from all my years of working in the system is that incremental change, the system is designed to respond to incremental change. And so that even though I work incrementally because that's all any one person can do. All any one person can do is work incrementally. And people say to me, well, why do you do the work if you don't think it will make a change? And I say, because I at least want my children to say, my mom tried. Because that's all we all can do is try our best. But in terms of what's going to take it down, maybe a comet. Maybe a radical shift in the climate that causes the rich nations not to be able to respond, the white nations to respond, that will allow the poor nations who have not developed such a reliance upon technology. It seems to me that right now the problem is that the system is designed to respond to incremental change, and the poor, the systems, the non-colored systems, are either outside of the systems or being co-opted into the system. So India is being co-opted into the system, and China is being co-opted into the system, and Japan has already been co-opted into the system. And you can't think of those countries as, and this goes back to my early thing, I don't think of them, I think of them as a part of the white system of supremacy, that for whatever reasons they are interested in they're getting benefits and they're interested in maintaining that benefit. And so they're not going to do anything to undermine it. And so we need something that allows the countries who are not a part of the system and the people who are not a part of the system who haven't to be able to challenge the system in a way that they can't respond to it quick enough, and consequently the system is undermined. And I think that is some kind of global disaster, to be quite frank. I hate to be pessimistic with such a young child.
Okay, I'll think of some more.
Okay.
I have two more, and then hopefully we can see if some folks have called in if they want to ask a question or two before program is over. You just alluded to it, talked about how there is a movement within the system of white supremacy to disregard talking about and keeping data of racial classifications. And we just won't talk about race. We'll be so-called colorblind, and that's, doing away with racism. I don't even see you as a black person or whatever, Asian American person or white person. You're just a person, and we don't need to keep a record of that. Professor Ian Haney Lopez, he was just on the program yesterday. He is the author of White by Law,
Right.
And he talked about how he thinks that is going to be the way white supremacy continues, by just saying there is no racism unless somebody mentions race. As long as we're not talking about race, nobody's being racist. And you talk about the same thing in your book, where you see disastrous effects on the health of black people, but you don't have doctors running around calling black patients nigger and things like that. As long as you don't have these overt expressions of racism, white supremacy, then it's very difficult to do anything about addressing the fact that you have obvious and clear differences in the effects on how black patients are treated and how white patients are treated. Can you talk about that with our listeners?
Yeah, one of the things that has happened, and when I look at, I teach race and racism in American law in addition to healthcare law, and one of the things that I've noticed, and I've taught torts, which is about how you injure people and sue individuals for those suits. And I've taught criminal law, which is, of course, about the crimes. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there is a distinct difference between how the legal system treats discrimination versus how it treats crimes and torts. In crimes and torts, there's a continuum of responsibility. So you can intend to kill someone, or you can negligently kill someone. Either one, you're going to be responsible. Mm. In tort, you can intend to cause a trap on your property for someone to fall, or you can negligently. That is, you didn't really intend it, you didn't even know maybe, but you should have known that there was a trap and you didn't fix it, okay? Mm. You can be responsible. But talking about the system of white supremacy, what do they do in discrimination law? They only make intent a level of suit. And so by what this colorblind approach is doing is feeding into an existing sort of thing. As long as someone doesn't intentionally discriminate, intentionally be racist, they can be negligent. We can all agree that they should have known that there was going to be a difference, but they didn't intend it. We're not going to have them be responsible. Now, the colorblind approach takes it even further, which is say, we are not going to actually, well, I say there's a colorblind liberal, and there's a liberal colorblind person, which I put President Obama in, and there is a conservative colorblind person, which I put Clarence Thomas in. And the difference is the liberal colorblind person is willing on rare occasions to talk about racism, but it's almost always in a historical fashion, and it's almost always sort of from the point of view that it's too divisive. And when they come up with solutions, they want neutral colorblind solutions to what are race-based problems. Well, the problem with that for us in our health system is that we know from all the data that already exists in health that there's a disparity in health care, disparity in food, disparity in where we're putting all the toxic dumps, and that we can stop collecting data, but unless we change the basic system of white supremacy, those disparities are going to continue and get worse. But without data, we won't be able to prove it, and we will be in the position that many European blacks find themselves in. And I have worked very closely. I went to a meeting of African descendants in Vienna, and in 2001, and it was the most amazing meeting because we were preparing for the World Conference Against Racism. There were people of African descent from the whole world. I didn't even know that they had people of African descent who were Chinese or people of African descent who were Norwegian and whose families had been there for centuries, much like here. And we barely could speak because we think of people of African descent in those areas as being recent immigrants. But there were people there. No, my family's been here 200, 300 years, okay? So we're here, and we are talking about preparing for the 2001 World Conference Against Racism. And the thing that came out was that there was an anti-black racism that existed all over the world, no matter where black people land, and that Europe had essentially gone the route after World War II of refusing to acknowledge the existence of race. And what their basic argument is, like, the Germans killed all the Jews because they thought they were a superior race. So if we say there is no races but one race, then no one can be superior. What that then translated into refusing to pass any laws that will allow them to collect data showing disparities. And so what I heard over and over again is what European blacks run into is saying we have this problem, that problem in our community, and whites saying, prove it. And then, of course, because without governmental data, and this is when we talk about not collecting data, we're talking about people telling the government not to collect data. Government data is the easiest, most comprehensive data, and without it, there's lots of things we won't be able to prove. And so I believe that it's the next big attack. In fact, it's already started out in California. An attempt to say that government, they call it the racial privacy bill, that people ought to have the right to keep their race private from the government. And that means not even asking.
Wow, very interesting. Yeah, I definitely want to have more programs that address that. I want to check to see if we have some folks call in who want to ask you a question or two. The number of folks, if they want to call in, is 347-215-6071. We're going to take a quick commercial before that. But before we take the commercial, you mentioned a lot of personal stories, and you shared some on the program today, but in your book, Dying While Black, you mentioned a lot of personal stories and just talking about how the system of white supremacy has impacted the health of your family members.
Right.
And you opened the... Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. You talked about your mother, Mary Pauline Hall, who passed at the age of 36. James Ernest Randall, your brother, who passed at the age of 56, and you already mentioned your father, Ernest Randall, who died and who had a smoking habit, as many black people do in the system of white supremacy. I want to take a moment of silence just to honor those non-white people, victims of white supremacy, and all of the victims of white supremacy who are suffering and or have passed away as a result of their mistreatment in a system of racism, white supremacy. We're going to take a quick moment of silence, commercial break, and then I will go to callers. I'm going to put everybody who calls in, I'll put you on, please, to preserve the integrity of the broadcast. No background noise, no speakerphone, and I'll just go down and call area codes out. So we'll have a quick moment of silence, commercial, get to the calls.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
All righty. And I wanted to point out, you said you had the conference in Vienna. We have a listener in Vienna, Saye. She's a non-white person, victim of white supremacy. 301, are you there?
Yes, hi. This is Jamal. How you doing? Can you hear me?
I'm well, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
How you doing?
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you a question about this whole thing about this universal health care that President Obama is having, and why so many uproars at these town hall meetings that deal with health care?
Well, first of all, there's a couple of things, complex things going on, and it's not been explained well. President Obama is not pushing for universal health care. I wish he was. What he's pushing for is expansion of health care insurance, which through a public option, and requiring some extended employer mandates and some individual mandates, and which would then expand the coverage to the 47 million uninsured, which is a good thing. I'm not criticizing that, but insurance doesn't equal access, and we have to be careful to make that distinction. Unless you have doctors and hospitals in your community, we know what it means to give people insurance with no doctors and hospital. It means that they still have to travel long distances and delay care. Okay, so Obama plans are the different plans that are being promoted has to do with health care and reform. The uproar, I think, is twofold. One, I think there is an attempt to just want to defeat Obama on this issue. They don't want anything passed, or they want something so weak to pass that it can be called a failure. And so I think the uproar is an attempt to do that, even though what's being talked about isn't all that radical in my mind. I think there's definitely built into this uproar that the uproar is coded racism. That because we've come to a colorblind place in our society, and because Obama is an African American man, that people code their racism by being upset at other things that he does, and I say that because their upset is not logical. So if they came to me with a logical protest against something Obama did, like I'm not a big supporter of Obama's health care plan because it's not radical enough, not because it's too conservative. Okay, and I can tell you the reasons why. They can't really tell you what is wrong with their plan, except that they don't want the government running their health care. And my answer to them is, but you prefer the airlines to run it? You know, we know how well business do with taking care of individuals, and that's your alternative. So I think that there's definitely some there's some definite outspoken, overt racism going on. But I think much of what is going on is people's conscious, subconscious, and not so subconscious fear of a black man.
Wow. 414, are you there with a question?
Yes, I am. How are you, Gus?
Hello.
And how are you, Professor Randall?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, I have a question. What can non-white people do to protect themselves when going to the doctor's office? I've been reading a lot of articles about non-white people not getting the proper health care that they should. So I would like to know your suggestions.
Well, I think there's some things you can do, and I have to tell you that when you are sick, very sick, the best thing you can do is take someone well with you.
Okay.
I'm serious.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I believe.
Because when you're sick, when I am sick, I can't think about critiquing whether or not this doctor is doing the right thing.
Right.
My mind is not even there. I'm too sick to be there. And I shouldn't have to be there. So the thing is first of all, this going into the doctor by yourself thing, don't do that. Take somebody in with you. Why do you care if let a loved one know what your health is going on and what's going on in your house. Have them sit there, authorize them to ask questions, authorize them to get information so that you can have someone who is responsible for your health when you're sick. And I dare say if you're running a high temperature, you're sick enough to have someone there. Okay. Secondly, do some research before, or have the person who is going to be your advocate, have them do the research. Go on the internet. Look up your symptoms. There's a lot of information out there. Question the doctor about the information. Question them about what they say. If you feel like you need time to think, or your advocate need time to think, ask, well, if I delay this for a moment, can I call you back? Can I go home, think about the choices, research the choices, and call you back? Is there going to be a problem if I delay? Ask, is there going to be a problem if I delay for a half a day? 90% of the time there won't be, and you don't need to make an immediate decision. Okay? Make sure, ask them what are the choices question them about what are the alternatives. Okay. Then go and do some research and see if you can determine whether there is data showing that people of color or black people have been discriminated against in that area. For instance, pain medication. Black men are under-prescribed pain medication. Okay? Mm-hmm. And when same level of pain on the same disease level, they are under-prescribed pain medication. Well, the thing you can do is, what is the usual range, and do you seem like you're at the lower range? And then you need to be able to ask your doctor about that. Why isn't it higher? Why can't you get it for longer length of time? And give them, buy a copy of the book, Dying. I give them a copy of my book to all my doctors.
What's it called?
Dying While Black.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's kind of like you got to educate the doctor about what they're doing, because they're not sitting there on a conscious level saying, I'm going to discriminate against black. They're letting all their stereotypes, prejudice, and biases impact them without even them knowing it. When they read a book like Dying While Black or Killing of the Black Body or something else like that, then they will start checking themselves. Mm-hmm. You know how you look both ways before you're going to jaywalk? Why are you looking both ways? Yeah, to see if a car is coming, also see if a cop is around. So if you educate the doctor about disparities related to health, then they're going to be conscious that you are going to be watching them, and they're going to watch themselves a little bit more. Okay. And so, I'm getting ready to change my. I have a cardiologist. I'm going into a new cardiologist, and I'm taking a book in and asking him to read it. Now, he may or may not, but just the title is going to put him on. And I have to tell you that I find, like, my dad, when I first started teaching here, I got a call that my dad was in the hospital for going to have a heart surgery on Monday. And so we all flew in. I got there Saturday, and I did what I advised you. I said to my dad, I want to look at your charts. Tell him I can look at your charts. So he did. Now, what do I know about cardiology? Nothing. But I went in and I said, I'm a nurse and I'm an attorney and I want to look at my dad's chart. So they gave me the chart to look at. Now, it looked okay to me. I didn't really know anything anyway. But here's what happened. Within hours, now, see, when you go into a teaching hospital, you have to understand that they let people learn on you, and that's okay. That's okay. People got to learn from somewhere. Right. But you want to be sure that your family member is getting the best care possible, okay? So within hours, they had bumped the residency that was going to do it from number 16 to number 10. And then by Sunday morning, they had bumped from resident 10 to resident number 3. And then by Sunday afternoon, it was the head cardiologist. Monday morning, we got a call that there had not been a sufficient enough trial of medication for the problem he had, and they were going to put off the surgery until he tried the medicine. My dad never had that heart surgery. Okay? All because I asked to look at their chart. And because I was knowledgeable. And you don't have to be a nurse and an attorney. You just have to appear knowledgeable. And it will stop them and cause them to think, are we doing something that can be questioned? And they will change their behavior. Because they're not the average individual in the average individual situation. We're not talking about systems now. Is just trying to do the best job they can, not understanding that they're working under a system of prejudice and stereotypes and biases that causes them to treat people of color differently. And what you want to do is put a check on that behavior with your loved one. And just that kind of knowledgeable, well person who is responsible for asking questions. I can't tell you how many times that has helped in my family.
Okay.
We have a couple other folks who called in. I want to make sure everybody gets at least one in, then we can come back.
Okay, that's fine.
850, are you there? 850, are you there? You're on the line.
Greetings.
Greetings,
Renegade, and greetings to you, Dr. Randall, and hi, Justice.
Hello.
This is 720 Renegade.
Yes, sir.
I have a couple comments, and I'll try and be quick, and I do have a question. First comment to you, Dr. Randall. Thank you more than words can possibly ever say for the pure mother wit, the comfort and the love that comes through by just the mere sound of your voice, let alone what you have to say with your words. Thank you more than words can ever say.
Thank you.
To you, Gus, Renegade, with your conversation that you had with Dr. McIntosh, a song by Michael Jackson kept coming through my mind, and I just couldn't get it out. And the words are, you've been hit by a smooth criminal. To you, Dr. Randall, earlier you had said, even though, and I'm not remembering everything, even though black people are eating like white people, we're still not living as long, and also you had something to that effect. And also you had said you didn't think that when white people are getting up in the morning that they're getting up thinking, now how can I mistreat, or something to that effect, black people. I'm not so sure about that. I'm very, very suspicious. But as regards that in health, may I read just a paragraph and get your thoughts on this, if you would, about something? Would that be okay?
It's fine with me. It's fine with the host.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay, quickly. This is by Dr. Laila Africa, and it's called Talking Can Make You Sick. He says, conversations with supposedly nice, well-meaning Caucasians can cause destructive emotions, anger, boredom, frustration, and stress in African people. Africans can feel Caucasians are deceitfully hiding their insincerity and dependent on word order or a logical, rational conversation that makes no holistic sense. Caucasian conversation is nutritionally draining to Africans because of the built-in psychosis of it, the arrogant, insulting tone of it, and the double-talk nature of it, conflicting ideas, right and wrong mixed, important words or long words, etc. Caucasian conversation is a series of words being processed and is self-centered. It causes Africans to have stress, emotional torture, mental confusion, and it is spiritually upsetting. Africans may not be consciously aware of the sympathetic nervous system reaction to the Caucasian verbal assaults, but they do feel a sense of vagueness and emptiness from Caucasian word salads. Caucasians typically use cliches or socially pleasant sentences. I am a nice white person talking to a Negro tone in their voice. I am not a racist, but I am white and superior tone, and the African's inner self reacts to this toxic verbal energy. The melanin-dominated African holistically feels the toxic energy, and they must ignite the immune system to defend them from Caucasian toxic word use. It nutritionally requires extra vitamin B6, phenylalanine, yucca, suma, ginkgo, tryptophan, rosemary, gotu kola, L-dopa, niacinamide, or methionine, tyrosine, ginseng, and a natural diet consisting of raw food to cope with the subtle energy loss caused by the word abuse, unholistic conversation of Caucasian white supremacists. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I, without endorsing the medical component in terms of the advice about what to take to eliminate, to reduce the stress in nutrition, we didn't get to I think the primary factor that causes the disparity in health for similarly situated blacks is the stress of racism. And that stress of racism is played out primarily through the words of people that's going on. And so I would have to agree with it. I mean, I agree with it. I mean, there is clear evidence that there is chronic stress of racism from the television, from the news media, from the radio, from conversations that you have with whites, from conversations you have with non-whites. It is equally stressful to me, at least, to talk to an ignorant non-white. And their word choices, especially because I expect so much more from them. I would agree with that, and I would agree that one of the primary, which goes to the end of the article, if I had to tell, it's kind of like, how do you advise individuals what to do about their health? I think if you could only do one thing, it is address how you can't get rid of the stress because you're in the system. But you can address how you're going to address the stress. And I think nutrition is part of that. I think meditation is part of that. I think relaxation exercise is part of that. I think some level of humor is a part of that. It's got to be crazy. God got to be crazy to invent this kind of world. You got to have some kind of level of humor. I think the thing though is you've got to address the stress of being in a system of racism. I really feel like I've been years deep into the enemy territory. Because you have to understand that the system of racism is established and maintained by two things. Power, and that power is through money and law. And if you don't have money and you don't have the law, you are 100% subjected to it. I've been teaching in a predominantly white institution, overwhelmingly white, where for 15 years I was the only black person on the faculty, the only person of color on the faculty, and where they had only 5% black students, and I have been outspoken on my anti-racism action, And I have come to believe that like any system, you can keep, as long as you keep most of the people ignorant who benefit from it, you can maintain the system. And that this system is maintained not because the average white person who comes to my law school is an active racist. It's because the average law student who comes to my law school is wholly ignorant about the system of white supremacy. They don't know it exists. They don't know that they benefit. They don't know they're in it. And they have bought into all of the explanations of why the system that they're in works the way it works. And don't even think of this past summer, I was teaching professional responsibility, in which I had one black person in my class. And I asked them to look at the rules of professional responsibility and to think about whether or not those rules for lawyers benefit or disparage communities based on race. I asked them that specific question. But I asked them first whether or not they had race. What was their race? And what was their racist culture? And do you know, most of them gave me vague look like, what? Race? And many of them wrote to me, I've never even thought about myself having race. Race is a term that I use to mean the other. And so I never think about me having race, me having benefits because of my race. And I get angry because I don't believe that exists and it hasn't been taught to them. So I think that in working on the system of trying to get rid of a system of white supremacy, our biggest battle is that the beneficiaries of the system are also the victims of the system and don't realize that they are a victim, because it's really not the system of white supremacy, in my mind, is really a system of capitalist supremacy. And to the extent that you're willing to buy into this extreme capitalistic form, you can reap the benefits of it. And I don't you know that I understand that race, that Oprah will still be discriminated based on race, even if, but that's because the system has maintained its base, its ability to have a lot of poor whites by making them feel superior to non-whites and making them ignorant of the process. It's like when you have a person who is has been burned a lot, you induce a coma. Wow. And so the whole process of healing for them is one that they don't even experience. They can't tell you anything because they were in a coma, a medically induced coma. Most people in here in America, most white people, because they don't have to deal with, are in an induced coma to the existence of white supremacy. And as long as they're in that induced coma, it's going to be very hard to get them to do anything.
We have, I believe, Non-Mighty Wick, computer user. I believe he called in with a question. Are you there? Not hearing him. His mic was on. There was one other person who called in. Their area code is not showing up. It's showing as 111. If you called in and you're not on 850-414 or 301, or I guess it's that 850 person, if you're there, if you have a question or comment and you called in and you haven't
Hello?
That's Justice, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Hello? Are you there?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to see if I was here.
Yes, ma'am. Is there anybody else who called in who has not asked a question yet, who had a question? Okay, not hearing. Justice, did you have a question or comment before we wrap things up?
Yes, I do.
Go right ahead.
What media would you recommend for kids to learn and understand white supremacy?
If you are a knowledgeable person like yourself, if the kid is a knowledgeable person like yourself, I'd say all media. In fact, one of the things I did with my kids is we watched everything. There was nothing we would not watch. And during that watching, we talked about it. We would talk about, now, does that make sense? Why do you think they're doing that? Or how are they off in that? In fact, I did it so much when they were children that when they got to be older, I was so much in the habit of talking to the media that we were watching and stuff that they would say, Mom, it's just TV, be quiet. But I think one of the things, I love media in terms of TV and stuff, but it's hard for me to watch because I'm constantly critiquing it for the racial messages that are being sent. And so I think that, one of the ways to understand the white supremacy is look at the media and critique it for the racial message that it's sending. And some of it is intended to impact whites, some of it intended to impact non-whites. Most of it is intended to impact both people in pretty much the same message. And I think you can get a really good understanding, especially from television and from movies and stuff and from music, because there are clear messages of white supremacy that is embedded in almost every movie, television show that I've seen. But you have to have that skill of critique already. I'm not so sure that I think without the skill of critique or someone helping you with the critique, I would almost say cut everything off. Because you are going to be hypnotized. In the media is very, very good at embedding slight messages. And unless you have the ability to pick up the message as it's happening, that gets embedded in your brain. And one of the things that people need to know is that unless you actively counter a message, you will have it in your brain. You can't watch media saying, oh, I just know it's TV. Well, no. The subtle messages go into your memory, go into your database, and affect other things. It's like your brain doesn't necessarily distinguish just TV from other things unless you teach it to. And you can only teach it to by actively looking for the messages of white supremacy, gender supremacy, homophobia. I mean, there's just all kinds of messages that are buried in media. And I would encourage the kids that whatever media that they look at, listen to, read, that they always ask the question, what's the hidden message of white supremacy in this media? Doesn't mean you don't enjoy it. It just means you reject the hidden message because you know what it is and you can tell other people what it is, so that when you get in a conversation you can say, oh yeah, I watched this show, but what do you think about that message of white supremacy that they buried into it?
Hello?
Hold on one second. I want to make sure Justice got her question answered, and if she has any other questions.
And can you explain to me how smoking cigarettes damage the body?
Yeah. First of all, the smoke is a toxin that goes into your lungs. When you breathe in and out, the blood vessels in the lung picks up toxics and then circulate those toxins throughout your whole body. Toxins is a poison, okay? Actually, anything that you breathe in your lung can be picked up through the blood vessels and circulated through your body. And then your body then reacts to that poison by stimulating your immunity system trying to attack it. But because it's a heavy, smoke, you know how smoke is, it's not something that it can get rid of. And so generally what it begins to do is encapsulate around it, build a capsule around it, and then abnormal cells start to develop. And usually what you find is cancer. You get a lot of cancer from smoking, and a lot of it in the lungs. You get a lot of lung cancer from smoking. But it also affects your brain because it's a drug. And the drug that the blood vessels takes the drugs up to your brain, and it's an addicting drug. And you get some kind of stimulus from it that is temporary. And the reason people go out and smoke so often is because their brain on a subconscious level says, it's time to give me a fix, it's time to give me a fix. And so then you get addicted to it. And some people can get addicted to very little. The reason why you have to not smoke even one is that you don't even know what level of smoking will make you addictive. And it's different levels for different people. For some people, it can be just one cigarette and they're addicted and they're smoking regularly. And for other people, it can be a few more and they can drop it like that. For some reason, African Americans, even though they smoke fewer cigarettes on average during the day, they are more addicted because they have addiction means that your body has a physical reaction that is only relieved by a cigarette smoke. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know Justice and I have another program to do later today on racism, white supremacy. So the people that called in, if you all have one last quick question you want to ask, we're going to get ready to wrap this up so Justice and I can regroup and get ready for the second show we're doing today. 301, do you have a quick question or comment you want to make before we wrap things up?
Yeah, the quick question I have is, are you a physician or?
I'm a nurse who's also an attorney, and I'm a nurse practitioner.
Okay, I want to ask you a question.
I've been nursing for over 20 years, and I practiced in law for 20 years.
As if you had your way in the perfect world, how would the healthcare system be for all people?
I'd go to a universal healthcare system. I would go to a Cuban model that focuses on public health, the delivery of public health services. I'd put doctors, I would pay primary care doctors, internists, and general practitioners, family nurse practitioners, the most money, and de-emphasize the payment of dermatologists and plastic surgeons and things like that. And I would put there would be a primary care provider within walking distance of any family and community, and that primary care provider would be charged with being responsible and would be paid for how healthy their patients stayed.
Thank you. The reason I asked you that is because...
Hold on one second, because, I want to get the other two, because I need a break to refresh for the next show. 414, do you have a quick question or comment before we wrap things up?
Yes. I would like to know how I can get in contact with Professor Randall.
Yeah. You can contact me at randall@udayton.edu.
Okay. Thank you.
And you can buy Dying While Black over Amazon. I always forget to say that.
Oh, of course. I will buy it.
Your book is on the website. People that are listening at Blog Talk Radio, you can see the picture for the book. You can click on it. It'll take you to the Amazon site. You can get it right there. I suspect they probably have this at Borders and a lot of bookstores. Excellent book. Please read it. 720.
Yes. Dr. Randall, if you were to make a definition of your own for law, what would it be?
The law is a system of rules put in place by a group that represents the minimum values of that group, designed to maintain the system of that group.
So in the system of white supremacy, do you think the laws have been put in place to maintain that system of white supremacy?
Every single law. This is one of the. I'd be happy to come back and have a discussion with you on that, because this is one of the discussions that I have with my students. Give me an area of law, and we can talk about how that area of law maintains white supremacy. There is not an area. Bankruptcy, contracts, property, torts, intellectual property, you name an area, the laws have not taken in effect how different groups are going to be affected differently. And more importantly, when necessary, only when necessary do they make laws that impact, give any privilege or or advance the interests of non-white people. But even then, they only do it in a way that maintains the power and resources of white people and their collaborators.
I for sure will be in contact to see if we can do that program. I would be thrilled to have a discussion about that. It was extraordinary to have you on the program today. Incredibly constructive information. I'm thrilled to death with the program, and like I said, you can count on me getting in touch with Dr. W. Michael Bird and Dr. Linda Clayton. When I get in touch with them to get them on the program, I'll let you know, and also I'll be getting in touch with you about doing the show on how every law supports the system of white supremacy. Can you share with our listeners your website? Because you have a website for the book and your own website.
Yeah, my website is academic.udayton.edu/race.
Can you give that to them one more time?
Academic.udayton, one word. I teach at the University of udayton.edu/race.
Outstanding. I found on the web, I believe, there's a website for the book Dying While Black. I think it's Dying While Black.
DyingWhileBlack.org.
Yes, ma'am. Again, University of Dayton, Professor Vernellia R. Randall, author of Dying While Black, an in-depth look at a crisis in the American healthcare system. Incredible honor to have you on the program today. Thank you for sharing your time with us on a Sunday afternoon.
I am so honored to have been asked, and I really enjoyed it, having this conversation with you all and Justin, and I look forward to coming back sometime.
For sure. We will be in touch to have you back on the program. Thank you a ton, Professor Randall.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Everybody who is
Thank you.
called in.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Into your other program.
Right on. I'm going to refresh and get prepared. We have a suspected white supremacist coming on the program at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. Justice and I will be right back. Justice, final thoughts before we close out?
This was a great show. Thank you very much.
Right on. Do you want to call? Do you want to talk before the next show so we can go over who we're going to be talking to and all that good stuff?
Yes.
Okay. 4:30? You want to give me a call at like 4:30?
Okay, that'll be great.
Outstanding. We will be right back, 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern. Do it again. John Delport, System of White Supremacy. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Buy Professor Randall's book, Dying While Black. It is phenomenal. Buy that one. Justice and Gus T. Renegade. We will be back. The Cows. Actually, I wanted to say before we go, I didn't think of Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal. I thought of They Don't Really Care About Us. I didn't really think Dr. McIntosh was that slick. I really thought she was just very arrogant in the way that she presented herself. I don't think she's slick at all. I do think she's a criminal, just not very slick about how she does her business. That's the final word. Thank you, Justice. Thank you, Professor Randall. Thank you, everyone, for calling in. We'll be back 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern. Cows, Context of White Supremacy.